would you just like to recap for us those 6 points?
I would love to.
You should recap all of them because you're good at writing and I'm better at speaking.
And God forbid I shouldn't teach at every given opportunity. Right. So we promised you 6 nuggets as part of the 6-pack. And here they are. The first one was you should structure the speech. If you're a left brainer, structure it in a sort of bullety sort of way. If you're a right brainer, in a mind mappy way, but whatever you want to do, it must have a structure. It doesn't have to be linear, can be nonlinear. There must be a plan. My preference is hook, meet, loop. Then Paul spoke about the role that anxiety plays in delivering a speech. He spoke about preparing for the freeze. He spoke about being exceptionally well prepared. He spoke about learning your intro and your close extremely well so that you can be a bit looser in the beginning, but not fall apart with a strength on either end. Then I spoke about the chosen one, which is the one message that directs your audience to do, think, or feel something. And I said that we should pick one overarching metaphor to do that, but that we could tell multiple anecdotes inside as long as we don't go down rabbit holes. Paul then spoke about body positioning and gesture, particularly gesture in the online or virtual space. And he spoke about putting down the tennis ball. If you're going to have a tennis ball mime in your presentation, don't forget to put it down just to carry that suspended disbelief through. Paul also said that we should look at how storytellers in life gesture when they tell stories in restaurants in the world and watch what we are learning just from what they are doing, even if we can't hear what they are saying. Paul then asked me about crafting word pictures. So if you're not a writer, how do you show, not tell? Number one, specificity. You tell the audience what you are seeing so that they are seeing the same thing. And number two, a little bit of moderation. So don't over egg your descriptions with adverbs, which are ly words, and be very, very sensitive in your choices of modifiers generally. So don't put too many adjectives in, read it out loud and run it by someone quite discerning to tell you if it's been overdone. And then I asked Paul my big question, which was, how do we make the audience do what we want at the end? And he said, well, you've got to know what you want them to do at the beginning. In other words, you've got to go in knowing what your objective is, begin with the end in mind, and then gear everything to taking them to that very exact point at the end. Is that correct, Paul? Is that an accurate reflection?
Absolutely. Now, if I can just bring one other thing in, and that is that if you've done your preparation and your rehearsal properly, and you know that you have a good speech to give, walk into the room with a smile on your face and take 5 deep breaths. Get all that nervous energy that's going into your fingertips and your toes back into your diaphragm where you need it. That helps you to push the air out of the lungs, over the trachea, and that wonderful little instrument called the larynx, which is your voice box. You'll sound more relaxed. You'll feel better. I was coaching 2 folk yesterday, and on the 3rd breath, she said she's already feeling better, just through a bit of deep breathing. It's a wonderful technique to use literally between 3 and 5 minutes before you're due to go live.
Thanks, Dan. What do you prefer? Speaking spontaneously, but with trigger phrases on a card, or learning your presentation off by heart, TED Talk style? I know what I prefer, but I'm going to let Paul answer.
Okay, so I'm going to start off by saying, to learn, if you're doing a 40-minute keynote, to learn that off rote is really tough. It'll probably take you a few months. So if it is a shorter kind of talk, like a 5 or 10-minute speech, and I just want to mention this to you because a lot of people think that a speech should be 40 minutes. There's absolutely no such thing. A speech can, in fact, be 2 hours. Ask Vladimir Putin. It can also be 2.5 minutes. Ask Abraham Lincoln. So a speech can be 30 seconds, quite frankly. So if it's a very short speech, yes, you can learn it off rote, but there are different methods of doing it. I was going to, in fact, ask Tiffany if a speech should be written out. Maybe you can speak to that, and then we'll go on to perhaps things like using cue cards.
I would love to. So I write my speech out word for word, no matter how long it is. If it's 5 minutes or 5 hours, it's written out, unless it's one that I give often, but those happen very rarely. I write it out word for word. I don't learn it by heart because it makes me so anxious. The learning by heart, I'm obsessed with where my commas are and my prepositions and what if I say on, but I meant at. Horrendous. Not a good thing for me as a speaker. Also makes me very robotic. because I rely on my memory rather than my personality, and no one really wants to listen to somebody's memory. So for me, I do write it out, but I don't learn it off by heart. I use the triggers on a cue card method. I number my cue cards, and Paul has also taught me to join them so that if I drop them, they come back up in one unit. So with a loop, with a key ring or something, a crocodile clip, whatever the vibe is. So but the writing out word for word, I have to do, there we go. The writing, I have to do word for word at the beginning, because that's how I get the best out of myself. So it's just my writing preference is word for word at the start, but I don't learn it off by heart. So that was the one question. And then the other thing, Paul, was?
Yeah, so part of that was really, does one use notes or cue cards? And I just want to talk to that very quickly. You can, in fact, take the main points of your speech and write them down. Now, one of the things about writing out a speech is in your speech, you may have anecdotes or stories. And very often you can just relate those stories because a story is a natural thing. You don't have to write the story out word for word, but some of the linking parts you might want to then write out and perhaps memorize parts of them or important key phrases. But what you can do is that you can use that, the roadmap method, whereby, let's say you're traveling from Johannesburg to Durban, and you know that the places you need to pass will be Alberton, Heidelberg, Frankfurt, Villiers, Harry Smith, Warden, Harry Smith, and so on and so forth. So you have your kind of signposts along the way, and those go onto your cue card. Now, the trick with a cue card is firstly not to write paragraphs. You just write key words or key phrases. And a key word or phrase is anything between 1 and 3 words that literally jolt it. But here's the problem. You write out your cue cards, and then you get on stage and you look at the darn thing and you think to yourself, what was that supposed to trigger? I can't remember. And that's because you never rehearsed with it. So actually, the key with cue cards is to rehearse with them. Because if you've done 2 or 3 rehearsals with your cue card, you might actually find that when you get up on the day and do your speech, you now know the flow so well that you don't actually need the cue cards, but they're on the table there next to you. And if you get stuck, you pause. You turn around, you pick up your cue card. It's been a 5-second pause. Nobody minds. You look down, you get the idea, you look up, and you continue speaking. You're able to identify what's on the card because you rehearsed it and you can remember the flow. Now, if you created your cue cards 2 weeks ago while you were starting off with your speech, and then the first time you pick them up again is the day you do the speech, you're going to forget half the thing that the triggers were supposed to trigger. So it's a nice technique. I would not stand in front of an audience with an A4 piece of paper. What you can do online is you can use a teleprompter, but then you need to be a good reader. You need to be somebody with the ability to be able to read with expression and not sound robotic. So does that make sense?
That's brilliant advice. Thank you. There's a question here that I want to answer. It came in quite quickly at the beginning, and I don't want to miss it. Dina, is it better to give an online presentation with your audience seeing your face, or rather your audience seeing you explain your diagrams? And Marie-Anne has actually said to Dina in the chat, PowerPoint allows you to present presentations with a video box in the corner. So I was going to say that I like both. I like my audience to be able to see me and my slides at the same time, because I need to know that they can see my face, because that's where a lot of my meaning comes in. But also I don't want to have to worry about hopping between slides and face. I want both slides and face when presenting online. I feel that I need both. Paul, what do you think?
Yeah, so there are methods of making sure that your slides and your face are on at the same time. Zoom has a method where you can do that. The only problem is that you have funny shapes coming out of your head while you're doing it. The method that I prefer, and if you're a Microsoft user, you would use OBS. If you're a Mac user, you would use Ecamm, which is what I use. What I generally do is that I break it into frames, so that I've got myself on one side, my slideshow on the other, and I actually run my slideshow from my phone, but I set it up in such a way that it's only on one half of the 16:9 screen. So there are various different ways of going about it. You just need to devise a method that is best for you. I don't like the standard Zoom way of doing it with having your slideshow and then you in a little corner. I would prefer to be able to see me big. And one of the things that we worked on, I wasn't initially quite sure how to do it without doing it in Ecamm, was to find a way that Tiffany and I could be next to each other so we could actually have a discussion, and we got that right.
Eventually.
And we ironed out all the problems that were surrounding it. I think we've got some good sound now. So it's all about doing what's comfortable for you. But I think the most important thing is that the audience wants to see a human being, and we don't really want the human being to be up in the top corner where they're so small that you can't see them.
I've learned something. Kat says she learned something too. There's some very good questions here. Trudy's actually given us a comment rather than a question, and she has said, writing the speech word for word is the worst thing she could ever do. She finds combining prep with rehearsal most effective instead of memorizing. It's so true. And actually, that's what I do wrong. I don't spend enough time rehearsing. I spend too much time memorizing and too much time writing.
Yeah.
Not enough time rehearsing. So actually, I need to change my split.
Just before
Terry
you go
asked me
on,
Yes.
you go on to me, this is what you've raised is a very important point. And the reason that it's critically important is that we get our delivery right by rehearsing.
Yeah.
And when we are writing our speech, we become so obsessed with the content that we forget that even a good speech, if it's not properly delivered with feeling and with gestures and expression, it's not going to come across powerfully. So you could argue that a not so good speech, if it's well delivered, would come across better than a well-written speech that's poorly delivered. So the delivery is actually the neglected aspect. And the only way you fix that is that you must rehearse. The other thing that it does is it makes you more confident, because on the day that you get up, if you've gone through it 3, 4, or 5 times, you know the flow better. You feel more confident and you can get up there and give it horns.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. Good one. So Terry asked me this via social media a while ago, and I'm very glad that she's here to ask it herself. The question is, Paul, we're gonna have to rock, paper, scissors for this one. How do you work out your fees if you're an author? Well, Terry, I'm going to make this specific. Terry is an artist and an amazing creative person, and has written this amazing memoir, which is called White Trash. White Trash. You can get it at Exclusive Books. It's just jaw-dropping. I have read it. Yeah. She's written this book, and now she wants to know, as an author who is now sort of tiptoeing onto the speaking circuit as part of publicizing a book, how do you work out your fees? Now, I have some strong opinions on this, and I'm sure Paul does as well. The short answer is, if you are speaking as a function of promoting book sales at an Exclusive Books or at a book club or at the Franschhoek Literary Festival or whatever, then I wouldn't charge, because the reason you're there is to expose the book and sell the book. But if, as a function of having written your book, you are now being asked to speak on non-book related things, but on experiences that you may have had that may be in the book or may not be in the book, then that should be a commercial endeavor and should have the appropriate fees attached. Now, the appropriate fees depend on about a zillion things.
What else have we got here? Any tips on writing the opening line?
Wait. We skipped one. Kat Wolf is asking, what are your thoughts on the care, believe, know, and do structure? So Kat, if I'm not mistaken, that is a Rich Mulholland thingy, or at least Rich Mulholland absolutely loves that structure in his story to stage methodology. And I love it too. What Kat is referring to there is make the audience care about your topic, make them believe that you know what you're talking about, give them some information that they know something they didn't know before, and then tell them what to do. I love it. I absolutely love it. But I want you to be aware, Kat, that it is more effective, that structure, for training via a speech than for speech making for its own sake. So you, I know, do training, and I do training, and that structure works absolutely beautifully when giving a presentation that is intended to teach the audience something. But it doesn't always work that well in a speech making context, because it can feel quite teachery, lecturerish, and not entertaining enough. So use it for training, don't use it on stage, like for stage speaking. That's my advice about that.
Okay, can we go on to, there's one here from Evelyn Alessandri. She's saying, any tips on writing the opening line? I find it quite stressful because I believe first impressions count. So let me try that one, and then Tiffany, you can add your afterthought onto there.
Okay.
The first thing is try and avoid telling a joke as your opening line. especially if you're not a joke teller, and especially if you haven't tested it on another audience before.
Oh.
And if you've tested it on an audience and they were drunk at the braai, they'll laugh at anything. So that might not work on your audience either. So you might say something controversial that makes them sit up and listen. But again, you can make a statement that aligns with something that they care about to get them on your side. So that often works very well. The point is the opening line needs to be powerful, and you'll often find the answer in your ultimate objective. So if you consider what your central message is, try and find an opening line that kind of ties in with how you're going to be closing it.
Yeah.
And sorry, just the last thing here, controversial is often good. You know, I mean, if you had to say something like, have you considered that maybe Vladimir Putin has a point? You know, people are going to, well, certainly people in the Western world are going to look up, but some people won't. So
controversial is good, but I want to go back to Paul's suggestion about, think about what your objective is. If you think about my example of the retiring chairman, and we're using the analogy of the captaincy of the plane, right? Then, and if you want your audience to feel emotionally connected to this person as a function of the speech, then you might go with something like, can you imagine sitting in your seat on an airplane and a voice comes over the loudspeaker to apologize to you, but to tell you that the captain has decided that, quite frankly, this is not for him, and he's parachuted out of the cockpit. So you are, for the moment, leaderless. You're hoping that autopilot's going to kick in at some point, or that the first mate or whatever the guy is that sits next to him is going to take over. But I mean, a plane without a ship, disaster. And then you go on to what this company would have been like without this guy, for example, right? But don't obsess so much with the opening line that you don't write anything, because you can always write your opening line last. So ideally you write it first, and then actually the writing is very easy, but that will only come with time. If you can't get your opening line early, fine. Go back to it at the end and write it last. We write headlines last because we don't actually know what we're going to say until it's done.
Yeah.
Blinking, Paul. How do you stop excessive blinking?
Eye drops. That's quite a tough one because you're not really focusing on your blinking. So it's very much like somebody that has a lot of ums in their speech. So what you would do then is record yourself doing 1 minute of speaking and count the ums so that you start becoming conscious of it. And then you'll find that as you focus on replacing your ums with pauses, the ums will disappear. So by the same token, do a video recording of yourself and try to focus on not blinking, and you'll find that you'll reduce it. You won't.
Eye drops would help, and maybe looking at the lighting in the room.
Yes, just one thing that's important. You don't have to eliminate all the blinks. We blink naturally, and it's good for our eyes to blink. You also don't have to eliminate all the ums. If you do tend to it's okay, you can And the other point I want to make that I actually forgot to mention earlier on, and that is that one of the things that puts such pressure on us is this obsession that we have with being perfect. Now, it's not everybody, but generally you get certain social styles of people that they've got to be perfect, otherwise just nothing's good enough. Folk, when you're delivering a speech, the objective is to get your message across, not to be perfect. Nobody cares if you're perfect. Nobody cares if you leave out a little bit. The whole idea is get the message across. Just kick perfect out of the door. You do not need to be perfect. If you make a mistake, if you put in a few ums, if you get a word mixed up, if you're Afrikaans and you can't think of an English word and you say, wat is die woord? It's fine. People will love you for it. Just be human. You know, we're human beings. We love somebody that's human. And please remember as well that the vast majority of people in South Africa that are delivering a speech or a presentation are doing so in a language that is not their mother tongue. They're under a lot more pressure than most of us English-speaking people are. So just give them a bit of slack, give yourself a bit of slack, and realize there's no need to be perfect. We actually have technically 10 seconds left. So should we take one more question?
I'm going to take a question from Kate Cross, which says, how are you sharing all these wonderful nuggets with the next generation? My daughter is 14 and loves her public speaking. I want her to know that speaking can be a career option. So Kate, your daughter is lucky enough to live in a world where TED is a thing. And so the only thing you need to do to show her that speaking is a career option is sign her up for the YouTube TED channel. But public speaking is wonderful if she does it at school. I must tell you that I did it at school. I was A, cuck at it, B, hated every second of it, and C, did it in Afrikaans, so it didn't really help me. But if she loves it, yay. Speech and drama, also amazing if she wants a career in public speaking. And yeah, you can make bombs. I mean, look at the people on YouTube. Look at, I don't know, like the people whose whole lives are just talking. They don't have to actually write anything, like, you know. You've just got to expose her to exceptional speeches, and there really are truly exceptional speeches and exceptional speakers online, and just keep her doing it. But also it will become a reinforcing circle, because over time she will see how that ability to speak confidently in public makes her better at everything. And so she will see the benefits in her actual life.